How many times have you finally wrapped your head around Next.js, only for them to drop another version that renames half the features, breaks the other half, and promises to simplify everything? Yeah, same. Every single time. But this time, it's actually worth it. Or is it really? Hi there, and welcome to the Next.js Crash Course, where I'll teach you not just the why and the what behind Next.js, but also dive straight into how to build real projects with it. First, you'll go through a deep crash course to visualize and master essential Next.js concepts, like architecture, rendering, routing, caching, adapters, API, and its powerful full-stack capabilities. Then, you'll dive into the code, bringing those ideas to life as you build a real-world application designed to teach you how to use these features the way the top companies do. This crash course alone will give you a rock-solid foundation. But if you're serious about mastering Next.js and taking your skills to a professional level, I've got something special for you. The Ultimate Next.js Course. Right now, the most popular Next.js course on the internet, where we go beyond the basics and dive deep into advanced enterprise-grade features. And I just launched the complete Next.js testing course too. So if you're watching this video right now, you can still grab our launch week bundle at 33% off. This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill. You're getting two massive courses, the brand new testing course and the Ultimate Next.js 16 course, plus a tactical testing ebook, all bundled together. This deal will disappear forever and the price shoots back up. The link is in the description, but honestly, pause the video right now and go grab it, because the last time we did this, the early birds cleaned it up in about 6 hours. But if you're still wondering whether Next.js is really worth learning, well, just ask Netflix, TikTok, Twitch, Hulu, Nike, Notion, or even OpenAI. The Next.js hype is real, even though it changes often. And if you don't dive in now, you could be missing out on career-changing opportunities. So yeah, it's the perfect time to impress employers and build your portfolio with something that screams production ready. Here's what you'll build and learn inside this video. File-based routing to master the core structure that makes Next.js lightning fast. UI development, where you're going to design and develop beautiful responsive interfaces that scale effortlessly. Client and server components, where you'll finally understand when, where, and why to use each one. Database modeling with MongoDB, where you'll structure your data the right way from the start. API routes, where you're going to build robust backends without leaving your Next.js project. Also server actions, image upload and hosting with Cloudinary for proper asset management, use cache, the hot topic of Next.js 16, SEO that works well, analytics powered by PostHog, an open source platform that gives you product insights, web analytics, feature flags, A/B testing, and session replays all in one place. And all these by ensuring you write production-level code with the help of CodeRabbit's intelligent roasting code reviews and AI-assisted development using Warp, where you'll be the architect and AI will do things for you, perfectly mirroring real-world industry workflows. So once again, everything you need is hiding in the description, like that bug you've been looking for. Free video kit containing the codebase, Figma designs, the Next.js guide, plus the testing course bundle that's 33% off until it self-destructs in a couple of days. Seriously, check it out. I know you never read descriptions, but this time, it's worth it. Time to cook. Let's go. Let me start with a very important first question. What does Next.js have that React doesn't? In simple terms, Next.js simplifies the development process and optimizes your applications. It does that through its primary functionalities, some of which you have to actively decide to use, and others that you get out of the box just by switching to Next.js. The first of Next.js's benefits is its architecture. Originally, React had two types of components, functional and class-based components. But now, components are also categorized by where they run. If a component runs in the user's browser, it's called a client component. And if it runs on the server, it's called a server component. This division was released in React 19, and although frameworks like Remix and Astro also support it, Next.js was the first to adopt it and fully utilize it. Since server components are more performant, Next.js automatically converts every new component you create into a server component, unless you specifically instruct it not to, only if you need some browser functionalities, but more on that later. The second Next.js benefit is in the way it handles rendering. While React 19 supports server components, Next.js extends them to more advanced rendering strategies, allowing you to choose exactly where and when they'll be rendered, optimizing the performance even further. First is client-side rendering, which happens on your browser. The server sends a basic HTML document and JavaScript code, which the browser executes to render the components and display the website. And the second is server-side rendering, which involves rendering the web page on the server before transmitting it to your browser. When you visit a page, the server processes and renders the components on the server and sends back fully rendered HTML and JavaScript code to the client, instantly displaying the website. But why does this matter? Well, on top of the fact that your website will load in 300 milliseconds and have page speed insights that look like this, server-side rendering will significantly improve your website's search engine optimization. Client-side rendering makes it almost impossible for search engines to crawl and index your websites, as they're completely empty. Next.js solves this issue by sending pre-rendered code, giving Google plenty of stuff to rank us on. The next big Next.js benefit is, of course, routing. In React, you need to install an additional React router package to create routes. On the other hand, Next.js doesn't require installing a separate routing package and uses a much more intuitive approach to routing called file-based routing. Each folder's name becomes a route's path. For example, a folder named About will create a new /about route. Super simple, right? And connecting directly to the routing system, the next best thing about Next.js is its evolution from a simple front-end library to a full stack framework. Using the same file-based routing system I just described, you can also create serverless functions to handle native backend API requests. This means you can create an API endpoint by simply creating a file called route.js in a specific folder without needing to worry about the server infrastructure. Next.js takes care of scaling automatically, and there are many other scaling features that Next.js provides out of the box, like automatic code splitting. While code splitting in React is possible, it requires manual configuration, especially as the application grows. Next.js automates code splitting by default. Well, what does that mean? It means that when a user navigates to a different page, only the code for that page is loaded, which significantly speeds up page load times. Pretty handy, right? But that was just one out of many built-in performance optimizations that Next.js provides. Font optimization reduces layout shift, improves loading time by preloading font files, and reduces reliance on external services like Google Fonts. Image optimization automatically compresses images and applies lazy loading, CDN support, and more. Script optimization optimizes even third-party scripts. And all of these great optimizations come right out of the box with Next.js. And it's not just performance. Next.js is the definition of cutting edge. It supports the latest features such as React Compiler, MDX file integration, managing most SEO-related tags, analytics that run without blocking UI, fast refresh, server components, hot module replacement, and more. Oh, I know that was a lot, right? That's totally okay. Stay with me and I'll teach you everything I know about Next.js in this crash course. Let's dive right into the demo and start using the React framework for the web, used by some of the world's largest companies, enabling you to create high-quality web applications. You can either click Get Started or just copy this installation command. Now, throughout the demo, you'll see me use WebStorm, a super powerful JavaScript and TypeScript IDE that, as of recently, became completely free for non-commercial use, which means that us regular developers can finally get the benefits of having a powerful IDE and not just use a regular text editor. So feel free to download it. The link is down in the description. And another thing that makes working with WebStorm a breeze is Junie, a smart coding agent. You can also download it, as you'll see me use it across this project, and it just improves your productivity so much more. Like, you can ask it questions or you can ask it to do things for you. Throughout the course, I'll show you more of what it can do. So once that is done, we're ready to start from the bare basics by creating a new empty project. WebStorm allows you to immediately start with a Next.js generator, which will install the latest version of Next.js for you. In this case, just so we can all follow along together, I'll start with creating a new project and I'll call it Next.js Demo. And we'll do it using TypeScript and click Create. Immediately, we'll be right within this project. So open up your terminal and paste the command you copied over from Next.js. That is npx create-next-app add latest, and then add the // to generate it in the current folder. But for now, I'll just delete this source folder and the additional files that got created for me by WebStorm, just so we have a completely clean slate. Once you press enter, you might need to install the installer, but once you do, you'll be asked a question. Would you like to use the recommended Next.js defaults? See, the installation process for the new version of Next.js got streamlined. You can still customize your settings. Like if you choose this option, you'll be given like 10 more questions to choose exactly how you want to architect your project. But in this case, the recommended settings are exactly what we need. TypeScript, ESLint, Tailwind CSS, App Router, and TurboPack. So go ahead and select the first option, and that's it. Next.js just started installing the dependencies, and there are just a few of them. React and React DOM and Next.js, that's it. When it comes to dev dependencies, there's also TypeScript, all the different types, as well as Tailwind CSS and ESLint. And in a couple of seconds, your project code is right here. Before we go ahead and run it, there's a new feature in Next.js 16 called TurboPack file system caching, which allows for significantly faster compile times across restarts. All internal Vercel apps are already using this feature. So if you'd like to enable it for your project, head over to Next Config, and then right at the top, you can say experimental and turn on the TurboPack file system cache for dev and set it to true. TurboPack is an actual word. Looks like WebStorm doesn't know about it, so I will save it to the dictionary. Now let's talk about the project structure. Your project is set up and ready to go. You'll see many files and folders, so let me walk you through them from bottom to the top. Starting with tsconfig.json. This is the configuration file for TypeScript. It defines what should be type checked, ignored, and which rules to follow. After that, we have a readme.md, which is a simple markdown file that explains how to run the project and provides all other relevant information. Then there's the post.css config.mjs, which is a configuration file for post.css, which is a tool used to process CSS with different plugins. You can see here that it mentions Tailwind CSS as a plugin, which allows you to use its utility-first classes within your project. Then there's the package lock.json. It's a file that locks the versions of dependencies and their exact subdependencies, ensuring that everyone working on the project uses the same exact versions. Then there's the package.json, which contains all the project dependencies and scripts. You can see that the name of the project is Next.js demo, its version, right now it's set to private. Then we have the scripts such as npm run dev, which will run the application in development mode, build to run an optimized production build, and there's also start and the lint. Package.json also keeps track of other dependencies and dev dependencies, which are only ran when we're developing. After that, we have the next env.dts. This file should not be touched. It's simply used as a Next.js TypeScript configuration. And then a super important file is nextconfig.ts, which allows you to configure your Next.js features, such as experimental options. You can see that there are many that you can actually use here, image settings, build settings, and more. There's the ESLint config, which allows you to configure ESLint for linting, .getignore, which allows you to ignore some files not to be pushed over to GitHub. And then we have two folders. The public folder, which is a place for static assets. You always need to put your images and other static data right here. There's also a node modules folder here, but I've hidden it because I never actually have to go into it. It's the heaviest object in the universe, you know? Well, jokes aside, it's a folder containing all the dependencies and packages that are required for your application to run. And finally, there's the app folder, which we'll explore next. You'll primarily work within this folder on most feature implementations, including creating pages, layouts, API routes, and more. So before we dive into the details of the files within here, let's actually run our application by opening up our terminal and running npm run dev. This will spin it up on localhost 3000, and if you open it up, it'll look something like this. To get started, edit the page.tsx file. Okay, let's find where that page.tsx is. looks like it is here. This file represents the homepage or the / route of your page. It contains some boilerplate code by default, so let's remove it entirely. Run RAFCE, which is a super nice snippet that I often use to create a simple React Aero functional export component. So press enter, and we can call it home. If this snippet didn't work for you, you must head over to plugins or packages, and then search for React snippets. Any package should do. In this case, I'm using modern React snippets. Here, we can say something along the lines of, welcome to Next.js. No longer in modern versions of Next.js is it needed to import React. It is done by default, so the view is even simpler. Let's explore other files right here. There's the favicon.ico at the top. Any file with this name in the root of the app will become your website's favicon. It's just a naming convention that allows you to add that little image that shows next to your title within the browser tab. There's the globals.css, which is where you can write all your custom CSS or Tailwind CSS utilities. Then there's the layout.tsx. This is the main entry point for your application. So anything that you do here will be applied across all pages and routes. That's why here we're importing and setting different fonts, as well as the application metadata. For example, if you change the metadata from create next app to welcome to Next.js, you can also change the description to something like check out jsmastery.com for more. Oh, and this is definitely not true. JS Mastery is a real word, so I'll add it to the dictionary. That's much better. So now if you head back to the browser, you'll see that the title changed, and you can also see welcome to Next.js. If you go ahead and change some class names, like making the text extra large, like saying 5XL, or making it underline, as soon as you get back to the browser, you'll be able to see changes instantly, thanks to Next.js's hot module replacement. So now that you're familiar with the entire Next.js application structure, in our next lesson, we'll get our hands dirty. At the start of the crash course, we talked about architecture, where we can write two types of components, client and server components. If you remember, I said that by default, the React components you'll write are server components. But are they really? If I head over to page.tsx, where we have our homepage component, let's add a console log before running this return. I'll say console.log, and I'll say what type of a component am I? Sounds like it has an existential crisis right here. But don't we all when new versions of Next.js drop? Now tell me, where do you think this console log will show up? In the browser? I was about to say no, it won't appear in the browser because it's a server component. But in recent versions of Next.js, they actually extended that server console log so that it appears in your browser's console as well. But don't let this confuse you. This console log is not happening within the browser. Next.js is just sharing it here with us for convenience. Server components are rendered on the server. So this brings me to the topic of React server components. They're the components that are rendered on the server, and their HTML output is then sent to the client. Since they're rendered on the server, they can access server-side resources directly, like databases or the file system. This helps reduce the amount of JavaScript sent to the client, improving performance. Server components are excellent when you need direct access to server-side resources, like accessing files in a file system, or you want to keep sensitive information, well, sensitive, such as access tokens and other keys, safe on the server. Alright, but if server components really are better, why can't everything be a server component? Well, if your component requires browser interactivity, such as clicking buttons, navigating to different pages, and submitting forms, then you need to turn it into a client component. So what are React client components? Client components are, of course, rendered on the client side. And in this case, client side simply means the browser. To use them in Next.js, you must add a use client directive at the top of the component. So back within our demo, let's create a new component. We can do it within a new folder called components, and then within the components folder, create a new file called hello.tsx. Within here, I'll create a new React functional component like this, and it doesn't differ from the previous server-rendered one, all until one point, when we give it a use client directive. This line right here will make sure that this entire component is client-side rendered. So if we give it a console log and say something like, I am a client component, and now we import it into our homepage by heading over to page.tsx, and we render it right here below this div. But first, I'll wrap both of them within a main tag, and then I will render the self-closing hello component, which we're importing from app components hello. Now, back within the browser, we still see this server log, which is fine. And of course, there is the I am a client component console log, which makes sense because we're rendering this client component, well, on the client, the browser. But to verify, let's quickly check out the terminal. Oh, and what is this? The log of the client component is also here. But how? Or more importantly, why? It's making me question myself now. Well, there is an explanation. Well, this is because server components are rendered only on the server side, while client components are pre-rendered on the server side to create a static shell and then hydrated on the client side. This means that everything within the client component that doesn't require interactivity or isn't dependent on the browser is still rendered on the server. The code or parts that rely on the browser or require interactivity are left as placeholders during server-side pre-rendering. When they reach the client, the browser then renders the client components and fills in the placeholders left by the server. I hope that makes sense. And that answers the question of what is server-side pre-rendering. A pretty cool feature by Next.js. I hope that's clear now. But if you're still unsure, take a second to pause it and re-watch it until it clicks. You can also add some additional console logs or components and then render them within the page.tsx. Don't proceed further if that doesn't make sense. And for a deeper dive with clearer explanations and more visuals, I would recommend checking out the Ultimate Next.js course, where I break down the entire client-server architecture in detail. So finally, when should you allow Next.js to turn your components into server-side components, and when should you manually change them to client-side? Well, a good rule of thumb is to leave it as server-side component until you need some browser interactivity, at which point you'll most likely get an error, and then you can add the use client directive at the top. Now that you understand the React components and how they work in Next.js, there's an important update in Next 16. React compiler support is now built in and stable. It automatically memoizes components to reduce unnecessary re-renders. No more of those use memo and use callback hooks. The compiler analyzes your code at build time and optimizes rendering behavior automatically. To enable it, we have to install the plugin. So open up your terminal, and I'll actually keep this one for my application running, and then I'll open up another one, which I'll call terminal, within which you can run npm install Babel plugin React compiler at latest. Once it installs, we can head back over to our nextconfig.ts, and at the top, we can set the React compiler to true. That's it. Now it's time to explore routing in detail. Because doing everything in a single page is boring, right? Like right now, we only have a homepage. But what about adding an additional page like /about? Well, Next.js uses file-based routing, which means that all the pages and layouts can be right here within the app folder. Oh, and therefore it's important to mention the components folder contains components and not pages, which means that it needs to be outside of the app folder. Then within the app, create a new folder and call it about. Within about, you can create a new page called page.tsx. And in there, you can render a simple component that simply renders an h1 that says about. Now, if you head back over to your application and modify your URL to /about, you can see that you'll instantly be redirected to the about route. It's being displayed in the UI. That's how you create routes in Next.js, as opposed to a very boilerplate-ish way to do it in React using React Router. In Next.js, we use a file-based routing system where folders are used to define routes. The folder name becomes the route name, and the page.tsx renders the UI for that route. It's like a special file for displaying the route's content. But that's not enough. Let's say you're developing an admin dashboard within this application, and you want to create a route, something like /dashboard/users and /dashboard/analytics. These are two different pages. Of course, you can't create two folders with the same name, right? This is where we use nested routes. So let me show you how we would do this. Simply create a new folder called dashboard, inside of which we'll create two more folders, one named users and the other named analytics. Both of these folders will contain their special page.tsx, within which I'll simply run rafce. I'll rename this one to analytics, and then within users, I'll also create a page.tsx, and I'll call this one users. Now, if you visit both of these routes by heading over to dashboard and then users, you'll be able to see users. And if you head over to dashboard/analytics, you'll be able to see analytics. Perfect. That's exactly what we wanted. Still, this may not be enough. Because what if you want to display each user's profile in the dashboard? Let's say that we have 4 predefined users in dashboard users. So right here, I'll call it dashboard users. That can be within an H1. And then right below it, we'll have a UL, an unordered list, with a class name of margin top of 10. And then within it, I'll create an LI with users from 1 to 4, like this. Now, let's say that you want to make each one of these list items clickable, so that when you click on user 1, you want to show full user details on a new page, like dashboard users user 1, and so on. You can't create these folders manually right here within users, like user 1, user 2, user 3. I mean, you could, but you would not be going anywhere. Because the next day, there's going to come a user 5, 6, or 10,000, and your life can't simply turn into creating folders. I think you have a bigger purpose than that. So this is what dynamic routing is all about. It's a route where part of the URL can change or be dynamic, typically based on the user input or specific data. And creating a dynamic route in Next.js is simple. All you have to do is wrap the changing part in square brackets. In our case, it'll be /dashboard/users, and within users, I'll create another folder that'll start and end with square brackets, and within it, I'll say ID. Then within this weird named folder, I'll add a new page.tsx. Now we'll modify the general users page to make each one of these LIs a link. I'll do that by selecting multiple cursors and render a link component coming from next link. So make sure to import it at the top. Then to each one of these links, I'll give an href of /dashboard/users/ and then their number, like 1, 2, 3, and 4. We can now close this link and then add the user text within it. That'll look something like this. Now, before we test these links out, if you now head over into this ID page and run rafce and call this user details, and then you head back over to your /dashboard/users page, if you try to click on some of these links, you'll automatically be redirected to the user details page. 1, 2, 3, 4. But each one of these just renders the text of user details. It's nothing specific. So how should we know which user's details should we actually render? Well, exactly for that purpose, there's a concept of params. See this part within square brackets, the ID? Whatever it says right here gets populated within params. So these structure the params, and we can define their type. Params are actually a promise, which gets resolved in an ID, which will be of a type string, which means that we can now extract the ID from params. But since it's a promise, we have to await it, which means that we need to turn this entire function into an asynchronous function. Yep, that's valid. These are called page params, and you can get these through the Next.js page only. If you want to get this info somewhere else, you either have to pass it down through a component or use a hook called useParams. So what you can do now is modify the text right here to render an H1 and say showing details for user number, and then we can render the ID because the ID is actually either 1, 2, 3, or 4. So if you head back and now switch over to a couple of users, you can see that each one of these page will be a new dynamic user. Right now, we're just rendering their number, but I think you can imagine that later on, we can show entirely different profile pages, user details, and maybe the posts they generated on this platform. So now you know how the file-based routing in Next.js works, how we can do nested routes, as well as dynamic routes through page params. Great work. Next, let's talk about layouts. Earlier, I briefly went through the main layout file, this one right here in the app, and I call this the starting point of our application. To demonstrate that in the concept of routing, if you go back to that file, and then right here at the top of the body, you add some piece of text like coming from the main layout. And if you go back to your main route, which is the homepage, you'll see coming from the main layout, then the text right here, and then hello. But if you switch over to localhost 3000/about, you'll also see the text that says coming from the main layout. And this will happen for every other page, including dashboard analytics or dashboard users. Yep, it's here too. This is because layout TSX acts as the parent for all of these routes. It allows you to share UI elements, like this piece of text right here, across multiple routes. For example, you can place features like a navbar or a footer right here. Let me give you an example. I'll say navbar right here, and then below the children, I'll render the footer. So now if you go back, you can see that it appears across all of these different pages, on the home page, on the about page, and even on the analytics users page. Simply add them once within the layout, and they'll be available whenever needed. In Next.js, a root layout like this one is always required. But you can create additional layouts if necessary. Let's say you want to render a specific UI just for the dashboard routes. These two right here. You can do that by creating another layout inside of the dashboard folder. I'll call it the same, layout.tsx. Don't try to call it something else because otherwise Next.js won't recognize it. Now, within it, you can create another React functional component because a layout technically isn't anything else than just a component, but it works on the principle of using props of children. Children is nothing else than a prop that is of a type React node. So basically, it's another component that we can pass within this layout for it to get rendered. So if you wanted every single component in the dashboard to have like a special dashboard navbar, you could create a p tag here that says dashboard navbar, and then render the rest of the children, which is basically the full pages that you're trying to render. If you now visit the user's dashboard, you'll see both the regular navbar coming from the original layout, as well as the dashboard navbar coming from the second layout. Hopefully that makes sense, right? But wait, what if you don't want the root layout to appear in the dashboard routes and only be shown in non-dashboard routes like the homepage? This means that you need a separate navbar for the dashboard and another one for the non-dashboard routes, which is very similar to how things work in real life, right? In such scenarios, you can use route groups. They allow you to organize your route segments and project structure without impacting the URL path. This means you can create folders, but unlike nested routes, these won't show up in the URL. How to do that is by simply wrapping the folder name inside parentheses. In our case, let's create two folders with two names. The first one will be right here within the app, and I'll call it dashboard, but this time wrapped in parentheses. It'll be for all the dashboard related routes. And then I'll create another folder within the app, and I'll call it route, also in parentheses, for other non-dashboard routes. And move the page.tsx as well as the about folder within the route folder. Now, remove this navbar and footer from the original layout. This is the primary layout. And instead, create a new layout within the root directory. It'll be called layout.tsx. You can run rafce. As you know, you're going to get access to the children. So we can even duplicate the layout that we have within the dashboard and simply paste it right here. This time, I'll give it just the navbar. So now we have the root. Within it, you have some folder of about, and then you have another layout and page. Also, move this layout from the dashboard without parentheses into the outside dashboard folder. So now both of these route groups, so-called, have their own layouts. So with all of those changes, let's check how everything is working now. If you head over to the homepage, you'll see that here we have the general navbar. If you head over to About, there's also the general layout navbar. But now, if you head over to localhost 3000 /dashboard /analytics, for example, here you'll see that we have a dashboard navbar. And this one is also shared within dashboard users. Perfect. So why are we using these route groups in the first place? Well, route groups allow you to create folders without affecting the URL. See, you don't have to go to root about or root page. This is not taken into account when you go to the URL bar. Rather, it is still just home or / for the home and about for the about. And then you don't have to do the dashboard analytics. Rather, it is just dashboard analytics because this is not a route group, but this one is. So even though creating route groups isn't taken into account when forming URLs, it still allows you to add layouts inside of them. And keep in mind that there has to be only one single primary homepage. Since route groups aren't taken into consideration when forming URLs, if you create a new page.tsx within dashboard here, and you already have one within root, that would not work because these two files would fight on which one would prevail. So let me give you an example right now. If I create a new page.tsx within the dashboard and create a new component within it, you'll get an error saying that you cannot have two parallel pages that resolve to the same path. Check out dashboard and root. So I'll go ahead and delete this one. And from Next.js 16 onward, routing and navigation have been completely reworked, making transitions much faster. The biggest update is layout deduplication. When prefetching multiple URLs that share the same layout, the layout is downloaded only once instead of per link. This optimization will happen automatically with no code changes required. That's what I like to see. Let's talk about error handling. In Next.js, there's a special file called error.js, or TS if you're using TypeScript, that catches errors and displays them on the UI. Similar to how we were able to create multiple layout files for each folder, be that a route group or a route folder, we can do the same for the error.ts file. Let's throw an error on purpose within the About page. So head over to root, about, page.tsx, and right at the top of the page, I'll say throw new error, and let's say that this feature is not yet implemented, like this. Now, if you visit the About page, you'll see what most developers don't like to see, a huge error pop-up that breaks our entire application. Instead of this, what would have been much nicer would be to see this error nicely packaged within a nice UI. To fix this, we can create a special error.tsx file in the root folder. So let's do it right here. And I'll call it error.tsx. And apparently, this error file has to be a client component. So we have to add a use client directive. Do you know why? Well, it's because these errors happen on the client or user side. So if we want to show them there, it has to be a client component. Now, if you check out the error handling documentation, you'll see an example of a simple client error. Just search for error.tsx. I'll go ahead and copy it and then paste it right here. It'll look something like this. It says error boundaries must be client components. We import useEffect for side effects. We get the error and the reset coming from props. We console log the error within the useEffect whenever the error changes. And then we display a message saying something went wrong, and then maybe a button that helps us reset it. So if you revisit the About page now, even though there's going to be a warning that you can open up right here, you'll be able to see something went wrong and then try again buttons right on this page as well. So you can more easily explain to the user what really happened. If you just want to have one global error, then you can do it by creating a global error.tsx file in the root of the app folder. Unlike layout.tsx, which displays everything from its parent, the error file works differently. Only the closest error file to the route takes priority, meaning you won't see the content both from global error.tsx and from the root error.tsx. Errors will bubble up to the nearest parent error file. Not all of them. Make sense? And to talk about something else other than errors, let's talk about loading UIs. Loading UIs in Next.js works very similarly to error handling. You want to show some kind of a loading progress while data is being fetched for users with a slow internet connection. It's as simple as adding a new loader.tsx file within the app. And within it, you can add some kind of a loader or spinner component. While the data is loading, Next.js will show the content you specified in the loading file. And once the data is received, the content in the page you're trying to render will be shown. It's super useful and surprisingly easy to do. I've covered this in more detail in the Ultimate Next.js course. As you can see here, there's an entire section dedicated to it, complete with challenges to help you practice. But in this crash course, you'll also see this in action in the next segment, where we'll actually do some real-world data fetching. Next.js 16 also introduces forbidden and unauthorized special files. They work similar to loading. You can use them to show a nice UI asking user to sign in, or tell them that they have no permission to view the page, instead of simply showing an error or redirecting them. You can explore all of these within the Next.js docs, or within the Ultimate Next.js course if you want to go deep. Data fetching, the most interesting concept in Next.js. There are different ways in which we can fetch content. A traditional way is using a useEffect. For example, this is what you would do. Let's say that you have a homepage where you're trying to set and fetch some albums. You create a new empty use state. You declare a useEffect within which you declare an asynchronous fetching function. Within it, you have an await fetch where you're trying to get some albums, and then you return that JSON and set it to the state. Finally, going a bit down, you map over those albums and show the data. But this isn't super efficient. There is a better alternative to fetch, and it's happening on the server side. Not only is it faster and more efficient, the code is also so much cleaner. Check this out. You declare a new functional component called home, and immediately on top of it, you make a fetch request. You check if it fails. If it doesn't, you simply declare it and set its response.json to the albums variable. You map over it and display the details. Go ahead, pause this video and test it out. You don't necessarily have to do all the styles, but you can at least try to fetch the data, map over the albums, and show each album's title. If you do it, visit the website and see if it works. You'll not see anything. You'll have to refresh to see the result. And it's not because HMR is not working, but rather HMR is caching your content. In latest versions of Next.js, there is a new feature called Server Components HMR Cache that allows you to cache fetch responses in server components across hot module replacement refreshes in local development. What this means is you'll have faster responses and reduced costs for build API calls. But now, coming back to the difference between server-side fetching versus client-side fetching, first of all, you'll notice the code difference between the two strategies. With server-side fetching, you wrote fewer lines of code, which improves the DX, developer experience. But that's not the only benefit. Server-side fetching has so many more benefits, like improved initial load time. As a server-side data fetching allows the page to be rendered with the data already included, it reduces the time to first contentful paint, FCP. In the client-side example, the user sees an empty page until the data is fetched and then rendered. The second and most important benefit of server-side fetching is better SEO. Search engine crawlers can more easily index content rendered on the server as the content is already provided in HTML format. In contrast, client-side fetching may result in content not being visible to crawlers right away, since it first needs to be fetched and then displayed on the UI, which can negatively impact your SEO. Next, not only is the code shorter, but the logic is simplified. Server components allow you to keep data fetching logic on the server closer to your data source. This can simplify your component logic and reduce the need for useEffect and useState hooks. And the next benefit is not that easy to understand at first, and it is automatic request deduplication. Next.js provides that automatic request deduplication when fetching data on the server, which can improve performance and reduce unnecessary API calls. Basically, request deduplication makes sure that when the same data is requested multiple times at once, only one request is sent. It stops duplicate requests from being made. And when talking about benefits of the server-side fetching versus client-side fetching, I really can't miss on improved security. Keeping API calls on the server allows you to better protect sensitive information like API keys, which should never be exposed on the client side. And adding to the list of benefits, we have reduced network waterfall. Client-side data fetching often leads to a network waterfall where requests are made sequentially. Server-side fetching can more efficiently parallelize those requests. I'll teach you how to do these parallel requests in our build and deploy project, so keep watching. But this isn't just about fetching. You can server render any other calls, maybe a direct database call to Prisma to get the list of posts, or even with Mongoose and MongoDB like this. That's the beauty of Next.js. This is achievable because these components are React server components, which allow you to access server-related resources directly. This means we can make direct database calls instead of needing to create an API and then fetch that API once again. And if you're still not convinced, you can always go for client-side fetching. How? Just add useClient at the top, bring back the use effects, the use states, and you're all set. Next.js will allow you to do whatever you think is best. And let's be honest, this is how we all used to use Next.js when we first transitioned over from React. It only feels natural, but it is the wrong way to use Next.js. And that's what made me create the whole Ultimate Next.js course in the first place, to teach Next.js the right way. But now take a moment to test both client-side and server-side rendering. You'll notice the differences I mentioned, such as seeing the blank page initially with client-side rendering, or if you inspect its source and see that nothing is there, or client-side not functioning at all if you disable JavaScript. In contrast, server-side fetching will still display the results even if JavaScript is turned off in the browser. I have to tell you a bit about API routes. Enough with front-end stuff, optimization, caching, performance, and all that. It's time for some backend work. If you've ever done some backend, even creating a simple hello world from server message requires a fair bit of setup. It involves setting up a project, installing necessary packages like Express for Node, writing server code, setting up Express, the port, and then making that port listen, running it, and then deploying it using some paid or free service so you can finally use it on the front end. It might not seem like a big deal when you're just reading or looking at the code, But things quickly start getting complicated when you have to write various routes, middlewares, and so on. But in the newest version of Next.js, it's super simple, much closer to what we did on the front end. You just create a special file within a folder for the specific route, and you're all set. There's no need to set up, manage, or monitor an active server separately. If you want to show the same message, hello world from backend in Next.js, you simply need to create a folder with any name and then create a special file named route.ts inside it. From there, you can immediately begin writing server code. Export async function get, return response.json, message hello world from backend. That's all there is to it. Your folder name serves as your API route name, with your business logic neatly encapsulated within this special route file. If you now go to the browser, modify the URL, and add hello world to it, you'll see hello world from backend as a response. But how can you create other API endpoints like post, patch, delete, and more? Well, for that, let's create a book endpoint with a local array as a database. A common practice when creating route handlers is to create a folder called API and write all the routes inside it. So create this API folder in the app directory and add a database file for storing some dummy books. Then you can create two routes, get and post, in app API books route.tsx. These are nested routes similar to what you explored previously in the routing part for the UI. For the delete and put, you'll have to create dynamic route handlers. And you already know how to do that. App API books and then dynamic square brackets ID / route.ts. And inside of it, you can export async function put for the update request and then export async function delete for the delete request. And then you can add the logic. So far, this feels good. Similar to what we did with UI routes, but this time for writing server code and creating APIs. So let's test them one by one to see if they work or not. And there you go. Everything works perfectly. This is how route handlers or APIs work in Next.js. It's super simple and straightforward. And the creation of APIs in Next.js was nice, but how can you use them on the UI? Well, it's a simple fetch. Just create a books route real quick and call the get API route to fetch the content. Const response, await fetch, localhost 3000 API books. You get them from the response, set them to the state, and render them. If you visit the books route, you'll see all of your books. As easy as it could be, thanks to the serverless architecture of Next.js and React 19 React Server components. And let's talk about caching. Caching isn't new, but in Next 16, it's been completely reworked. So what is caching? It simply means storing data temporarily, so it can be reused instead of refetched or rebuilt. In Next.js, caching happens across multiple layers. There's a browser cache, which saves static files locally. There's the server cache, which stores pre-rendered pages and API responses. And then there's the data cache, which remembers fetch data to avoid repeat requests. Together, they make your app feel instant. So let's talk about the new caching model. See, the old modes like the SSG, ISR, and PPR still exist, but now they're just outcomes of how you define cache boundaries, not separate settings. You no longer choose SSR or SSG. You simply define what gets cached, and Next.js handles the rest. You can enable this new system by simply adding an additional flag to your Next config. Caching is disabled by default, so you must explicitly decide what to cache. Like use client or use server, you can mark routes, components, or even functions with use cache. This tells Next.js to store and reuse the output if inputs haven't changed. For example, you can define it on a file level, component level, as well as on a functional level. Simply placing use cache at the top of a layout or a page pre-renders it at build time, stores it in memory, and then revalidates it automatically every 15 minutes by default. If you want to fine-tune how cache works, there's the cache life method, which controls for how long data stays cached. You can write it something like this: use cache at the top, import cache life, and then define cache life maybe hours, which is going to cache the data below it for 1 hour. You can also define custom lifetimes in your config, and you can also use cache tag to group cached items for easier invalidation. Cache life controls when to clear, and cache tag controls what to clear. To refresh constant instantly, you can just use revalidate or revalidate tag. Now, when talking about caching, we also have to talk about partial pre-rendering, or PPR. See, with cache components option enabled, you don't need PPR set to true. Static parts marked with use cache are pre-rendered automatically, while dynamic parts stream in with React Suspense. The takeaway here is that this is a completely new caching mindset. Same principles, different syntax. It will take some time to adjust, but once you do, it'll give you precise control and better performance. Let's just hope that we don't see use in next. Jokes aside, I already started working on the new caching module within the Ultimate Next.js course. But now let's talk about something even newer, a feature that'll make deployment and scaling way more flexible. After V16 of Next.js, we also have build adapters. They're currently in alpha, and it's a big deal for everyone using Next. Until now, the Next.js build process was tightly connected to how Vercel worked behind the scenes. That made sense. Vercel created Next, but things are changing. With the new build adapters API, you and hosting providers can hook directly into the build pipeline and customize it. Think of an adapter as a small bridge that teaches Next.js how to build for different environments. Adapters can modify your Next.js config before build time, transform the final build output, or adjust how your app runs depending on where it's hosted, be it Vercel, AWS, Cloudflare, Netlify, or even your own server. This means zero config deployments on any platform, environment-specific optimizations, and most importantly, freedom. Because now you're not tied to just one provider. It's the start of a more open and flexible Next.js ecosystem, so it's definitely something to keep an eye on. One final thing I want to teach you before you're ready to start creating your Next.js application, and that is search engine optimization. Specifically, how we use metadata in Next.js to improve our SEO. And when I mention metadata, I'm referring to the look and feel of our website when we share it with others on messaging platforms or post it on social media platforms or on internet in general, like for example in search engines. In today's world, we need to ensure that our content is shareable. So there are two ways in which we can manage metadata in our Next.js application. The first one is config-based. All you have to do is create a JavaScript object in the layout or any kind of page file and export it. Next.js will automatically detect it and turn it into relevant meta tags for those routes. Something like export const metadata is equal to, and then in there you can provide all sorts of different SEO properties such as title, description, thumbnail, and more. Because it's higher on the priority list, it'll override the default specified in the global layout. This allows you to either define unique metadata for each route or rely on the metadata from the root layout. It's entirely up to you. But everything we discussed so far is just static metadata. Means that it's not going to change. Home is always going to be home. But there are also going to be cases in which you want to create dynamic metadata based on some kind of content on the page, such as a blog title. It's super simple. The only thing you have to do is export a new async function called generate metadata, which gets access to params. Params being the same params that we had before from dynamic routes. You can extract the ID or the name or anything else. Based on that ID, you can get full resource details or user profile details, whatever it is. Then you can use those details to formulate SEO title, descriptions, thumbnails, and more, And you can simply return a dynamic object of all of these properties. That's it. As simple as that. Are you with me so far? Good. And the other way in which we can set metadata in Next.js is file-based metadata. As the name suggests, you can put files like a robot, sitemap, favicon, open graph images, or other site icons directly inside the app folder, and Next.js will automatically detect and generate corresponding meta tags. For example, you can have an app, and then a favicon, and then an icon, and then an open graph image, Twitter image. All of these properties will get added to your meta tags. It's just about adding the files with the right names. They have to be proper names directly inside the app folder. It'll work out the same as the config-based approach. You can find a full list of all files that can be created to define metadata here. But for the time being, I still prefer creating it by exporting the config file from layouts or individual pages. And it's worth noting that file-based metadata has a higher priority and will override any config-based metadata. So if you set it in a file, it'll be used instead of the ones that you set in the configuration. So now you know how to make your apps shareable, SEO optimized, and search engine crawlable. With that in mind, I think you're ready. First, there was a lot of theory, and then there was more theory disguised in this practical part, but now you're ready to dive into code. You're ready to dive right in and build and deploy your Next.js app with all of these optimizations, performance updates, and new features baked right into it. And now comes the more exciting and hands-on part of this crash course. While understanding the theory is essential, knowing how to apply it is what truly sets you apart. So let's put everything you've learned into action by building and deploying dev events. At first, it might seem like a boring application. Just 2 pages where users can browse upcoming events, view details, and book a spot by entering their email, like a newsletter sign-up. But I've chosen this idea for a reason. Behind that clean, modern UI lies a full-stack learning experience. See, by building this app, you'll get practical exposure to file-based routing, React server components, client versus server components to understand when and why to use each, database modeling, where you can design and structure backend data layer, API routes that you can build and connect your frontend to them, server actions to perform server-side mutations securely. You'll also apply the new use cache caching model for instant updates, and then we'll also track the analytics of our platform to understand how our users interact with it. This project will walk you through design, development, and deployment, all the core stages that bring any application to life. So let's dive right in. To start developing your app with the framework used by some of the world's largest companies, we can start with a single command: npx create next app at latest. But first, we have to set up our coding environment so that we can actually paste that command somewhere. I'll be using WebStorm as my IDE, as of recently, it became completely free for non-commercial use. I'll leave the link down in the description so you can download it and try it out too. Once you open it up, you'll be able to quickly create a new project. I'll start with an empty project and name it Next.js Crash Course. Create it and open it up. Then you can open up the built-in integrated terminal and paste the command you just copied. But make sure to add a dot at the end, which will make sure that the application gets installed within your current folder. And then it'll ask you whether you would like to use the recommended Next.js defaults, such as TypeScript, ESLint, Tailwind CSS, App Router, and TurboPack, to which we'll say yes, this is the exact tech stack that we're using. Then it'll proceed with installing the necessary dependencies, which there are very few of, such as React, React DOM, and Next, and then also dev dependencies from TypeScript and the corresponding types over to Tailwind CSS and ESLint. Once it installs, you can run npm run dev to run it on your localhost 3000, and then open it up. We get this new and updated boilerplate page, which looks even simpler than before, and it says, looking to get started, just edit the page.tsx file. So let's explore the app structure. You can see that not a lot has changed. we still have this page, which contains the bulk of the content. So let's go ahead and remove all of it and just run RAFCE to quickly spin up a new React Air function component with exports. React imports are no longer necessary, so we can just say, welcome to Next.js 16. If this command didn't work for you, you can head over to your plugins or packages and search for React snippets. In this case, I'm using modern React snippets. If you made the changes, you should be able to see that now it says just welcome to Next.js 16 on your localhost 3000. Now, throughout this course, I'll teach you how to build a dev event Next.js application. I found this to be the perfect project to go over all the primary, but also the latest Next.js functionalities. So together, we'll explore what Next.js has to offer while building a couple of these beautifully designed and fully mobile responsive pages. Of course, the focus of this course is the main star of the show, which is Next.js, so we don't need to focus too much on the CSS. For that reason, in the description down below, you'll be able to find a complete media kit containing the link to the Figma design, which you can explore and rebuild on your own if you want to, a complete source code, as well as some snippets that are going to make the building of our application easier, allowing us to copy very lengthy and redundant presentational stuff and allow us to focus only on what matters. So let's start with copying this globals.css file and then heading over within our application, app, globals.css, select everything and overwrite it with what we copied over from the globals.css within the snippets down below. What we're doing here is just setting up the base theme of our application with some styles that we'll be using later on, modifying the color of the body, as well as adding some helper utility functions that are going to help us style different headings, navigation items, and more, and then some components for the hero sections, events, cards, and so on. Now, you can see that this CSS file also requires us to install TW, Tailwind Animate CSS, so go ahead and install it too. It is a dev dependency that some styles require. So open up the terminal. In this case, this terminal is already running the application, but thankfully WebStorm allows us to open up multiple terminals. So I'll say app, and then I'll open up another one, which I'll call just terminal. Within here, you can run npm install --save-dev tw animate css. And as soon as it gets installed, you should be able to see that this red squiggly line will be completely gone. There we go. Here it is. Now, alongside all the styles, there's also a couple of different icons and images that we'll need for this application to look this good. Starting from this little logo icon to maybe some images that we can use for the events. Or maybe we have some icons that we want to use here. You can see that we're using this very cool icon style. So I took some time to find them and I'll give them to you right here within the assets folder. So in the video kit, click on the assets, download them. Don't worry, there's no viruses on there. Once you download them, you can unzip them. And here you'll see a public folder. So what you can do is delete the current public folder and then simply drag and drop this new one in, as well as drag and drop this new favicon that we have for our application into the app folder to replace the current one. Now, if you open up the app, it'll still be more or less the same as what we had before, but let's actually put it side by side by our IDE so we can see the changes we're implementing live as we code them. So I'll drag and drop it right here to the side and give it some space. Now, you can see under the tab name that the logo changed, or the favicon, but the title is still Create Next App. So let's go ahead and modify that by heading over into App, layout.tsx, where we're importing different fonts, and here's the app metadata. So what we can do is first change the metadata to the real app name, such as dev event, which actually is the hub for every dev event you mustn't miss. That's exactly what we'll build. And we'll also be using a bit more interesting fonts. So let's go ahead and update these two fonts that we have, not Geist and Geist Mono. Rather, we'll be importing, now bear with me when it comes to the title, Shibasted Grotesque. This is the font we'll be using. And we'll also add the Martian Mono, okay? from font Google. So let's go ahead and define them right here. This is the, whatever the name is, grotesque. We can use the camel case right here, and we'll use this name to create it. I'll give it the actual variable name, just as the actual name is. And you can see my WebStorm is complaining about this not being an actual word, but believe me, it is. So we are gonna save it to the dictionary. Same thing for the grotesque, so that in the future, it actually knows that this is a real word. Okay, and the same thing for the Martian mono. We can call this font Martian mono, and we're gonna get the Latin variant of it. Perfect. Now that we have declared the metadata, we can change these two fonts below by saying class name, Shipstead grotesque, as well as the Martian mono. Perfect. And let's fix this variable name right here. So it's actually Martian mono. So now we'll be able to use these two fonts across our application. And we can also add the min H screen, which means that the whole body will take the minimum of 100% of the screen, because everything should actually fit in there. Perfect. So we can still see just the regular welcome to Next.js 16 test, right? To make it a tiny bit more interesting, we can head over to that page and switch it over into an H1 tag, which will automatically make it inherit our Tailwind styles. Why? Because in our globals.css, if you search for H1, we're applying the following styles to every single element. Don't worry, whenever we're using some complex class names, I'll always explain how these styles are actually getting applied, just as we did right here. And since we're working on the layout right now, keep in mind that our design has this very interesting, I don't even know how to call it, like a ray design. You can see rays of sun, some bluish, greenish sun popping from the top right corner. So while we're working on the layout, since every page has it, we can immediately go ahead and implement it. For these rays of sun, I found this very cool React Bits library, which is a component library for creative developers. And I just want to give them a quick shout out for this component. You can see how the rays actually follow the cursor, and they provide you with the full code for it. So you can just Google for React Bits light rays, or I'll leave the link down in the video kit. Then head over to the code and follow the installation and the usage. I'll use the CLI installation, so it's gonna automatically do it through ShadCN, which is another huge advantage. So switch over from manual to CLI and copy the command and paste it within our terminal. It'll ask us whether we wanna install ShadCN. That's for sure gonna be a yes. Then when you get asked some questions, such as whether you wanna create a components JSON file, say yes to that, and then which color would you like to select as the base color? Let's go over with neutral. It'll add all that info within our components JSON. Now what you can do is create a new component within the components folder. So first generate the folder itself called components, and then a new file called lightrays.tsx. You can go ahead and automatically copy the code over from here, but to make it fit a bit better with the design, I made some changes to the component and provided the updated version to you within the video kit down below. So you can just copy it from components UI lightrays. So just go ahead and paste it into this file we just created. You don't have to worry that there's so much code here. You can think of this as a typical ShadCN component that you do not touch. The only thing I've done is added the top center offset, which will move the trays a bit so it looks exactly as it does in the design. Now we want to apply these light rays to the whole application by putting them inside, not of the page, because then we have to do it for every single page, but rather inside of the layout, because what happens here will actually be translated over to every single page that is within this layout. So right here at the top of the body, go ahead and copy the usage part of the light rays from the documentation and paste it right here. You have to auto import it from light rays component light rays, and we can change how it behaves, starting with rays origin, which I'll set to top center offset. If you head over to your application, you should be able to see how it looks like. We definitely want to remove this import statement. There we go. And we don't need to put it into an additional div. We just want it to be there right within the body. There we go. So you can see how the rays are moving right now. And we can also change the ray color. I found the color of hash 5DFECA to work nice. It has this greenish hue. You can play with the ray's speed. I'll set it to something like 0.5 for them to be a bit slower. The light spread can be around 0.9. Ray length will be about 1.4. Follow mouse can be set to true. Mouse influence, I will lower it significantly because the goal of this app is not for the users to play with the actual rays. It is for them to check out dev events. So whenever you're implementing some animations, you want to make them simple. The noise amount can be set to 0, and distortion can be set also to a minimal amount with no need to provide a custom class name. I will put the rays into a div like it was before, but I'll provide some different class names, such as absolute. This is very important because this will position the light rays absolutely on the page, which means that it'll not interact with the rest of the elements on the page. I'll also inset it to the top by saying inset 0 and top 0, giving it an index of z minus 1. So that way it appears behind the elements with a min h of screen. Perfect. And I'll also give the children the main tag. So they'll be wrapped right within the main of the application. That is where we'll load the actual content of the page. Perfect. So welcome to Next.js. The rays are at the top. Finally, within our page, to make it look a bit nicer, we can wrap this into a section. We can give it an h1 within that section that'll have a class name equal to text-center, and it'll say the hub. For every dev, we can add a break tag in between. Event, you can't miss, similar to what we had in our layout. And then we can have another p tag right below it that'll say something along the lines of hackathons, meetups, and conferences, all in one place. And I like it how WebStorm actually catches the typos, not just code mistakes. So I can just hover over it and automatically fix it. And I'll give this p tag a class name of text-center, as well as a margin top of 5 to divide it a bit from the main title. Okay, we have the main content, but what happened to the styles? It seems like we don't have that dark background we used to have. That's because after we installed this package, it went ahead and modified our globals.css. So just once again, go ahead and copy the final one, head over to the globals.css file, and override it. If you do that, you'll notice that the styles will be there, and you'll also see very light rays at the top. But if you extend it to full screen, you can see that they're much more pronounced, but still not taking away from the overall experience of the application. So just like that, we've successfully set up our project and we can already see something on the screen. In the next lesson, let's develop even more parts of the homepage UI. Let's start developing the other parts of our homepage, starting with this Explore button. We can create it as a new component. Right here within our components folder, I'll create a new file called Explore btn. .tsx. We're creating a separate component as button is associated with event listeners that have to happen on the client side. This kind of thinking is necessary when developing Next.js applications because it's all about server-side rendering. See, I'll run RAFCE right here to quickly spin it up and you'll get a better idea of what I'm saying. This component will be a button, specifically a button that we're using within our page. So let's immediately go ahead and import it below our p tag, Explore btn, as a self-closing tag. There we go, you can see it right here. Now keep in mind that our homepage is server-side rendered. We're getting all the benefits of SEO boost as well as quick load times, but we still need some kind of functionality for this button because buttons will eventually have on-click listeners where, for example, we want to perform an action. For now, that action can be just saying that we clicked it. But as soon as you give it an on-click listener, that means that you have to turn it into a client component. So that's the reason why I turned this button into its own component. So now I can add this use client directive at the top. You can read a bit more about server and client components within Next.js documentation, where it explains how they work and how these are basically two entirely different contexts and environments. Client refers to browser on a user's device that sends a request to a server for your application code, and the server refers to the computer in a data center that stores your application code. What's important to note that each has its own set of capabilities and constraints. And I dive super deep into this within the Ultimate Next.js course, where we cover application navigation, the state management, and how we can handle it on the server side through URL state management, and finally diving into thinking in backend when it comes to Next.js applications. Same things goes for server actions. How do they actually work and how do they work on the server specifically? And then of course, different approaches when rendering components, whether on server or on client. But with that in mind, we now have this button that is a client component inside of another server component. So this is rendered on the server, but if you need some extra functionality, you can render it on the client. That's all I want you to know for now. So we can give this button a type equal to button, an ID equal to explore btn, with a class name of margin top of 7 to divide it a bit from the content, as well as the margin X of auto. Within this button, we can render an anchor tag to make it a link pointing to hash events, which will show below the button. It'll say explore events, and right below it, we'll actually render an image. So this is a Next.js image, so we can import it from there with a source of /icons /arrow-down.svg with an alt tag of arrow-down. And we can close it right here. We'll also have to give it a width of something about 24 and a height of 24, so it actually appears as it knows its dimensions. There we go. Explore events. And it looks like my styles were not getting applied, so I simply repasted the final globals.css into the public and resaved all the files, and it looks like right now we're good. And I just want to recap this situation one more time, because it might be counterintuitive, and in this crash course, I don't want there to be any confusion. The goal is to make this the best Next.js crash course you watched with all the questions answered. So if at any point you're confused, leave the timestamp of where you're at the video in the comment, and then write your question and I'll clarify it. That way, we'll be helping out each other. I mean, that's kind of like what we're doing in the Ultimate Next.js course, where in the architecture lesson, if we dive into client versus server paradigm, there's a complete lesson on the topic, and then below that lesson, we have the comments. For example, Robin was confused between server-side rendering and server components, and that allows us to provide a much more detailed response to his question specifically, as well as other people can ask questions or just contribute to the overall learning process. Okay, but why did I even start talking about this? Well, that's because it might feel super weird that we have already split this explore button into its own component. Usually, you won't start by building client components right away. Instead, you'll create them as you encounter specific client-side needs, such as the need for an on-click listener right here. In many cases, most of your features will run on the server side, but there will be many times where certain parts just need to be implemented on the client. And that's where this architectural mindset becomes incredibly valuable. It'll help you decide exactly which parts should be rendered on the server and which should be handled by the client, instead of just defaulting to one side. I'm happy to say that that's also covered within the Ultimate Next.js course. Here's a lesson summary and its full transcript. And people in the comments are also discussing how this works on different types of large-scale applications, such as within an e-commerce app. So if you haven't already, definitely explore the Ultimate Next.js course, now bundled with the complete testing course, so you can also later on test these server and client components. I'll leave a special discount link down in the description. But now let's develop the rest of the homepage. Below the button, I'll develop another div That div will have a class name equal to margin top of 20 and space y of 7 to give it some breathing room. And it'll have an h3 that'll say featured events. Below it, we can map over a couple of elements in an unordered list with a class name of events, where I'll create a new dynamic block of code where you can create an array that'll just have numbers from 1 to 5, and we can map over them. Each one of these numbers will later on present a full object containing that event's data, and then we can automatically return a new list item. When I say automatically return, I mean not opening up a function block with curly braces here, but rather just putting parentheses, which means that we don't even have to define return, rather it returns it by default. Since we're mapping over this, we have to give it a key equal to event, and I'll say event. So it should say event 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So let's create a new component in the components folder, and I'll call it navbar.tsx. Within it, we can run rafce to quickly spin it up. We'll use semantic elements, such as header in this case, and within it, a nav. This helps screen readers and in general improves your web app and its SEO because browsers better understand the elements on your app. Then I'll render a link component right here. This link is coming from next link, so you can automatically import it. And I'll make it point to /, which is just the homepage, with a class name of logo, within which we can then render an image, also coming from next. It's going to be /icons /logo.png, which is the path to the actual logo, with an alt tag of logo, a width of about 24 as before, and a height of 24 as well. If you save it, you won't be able to see anything yet. Of course, that's because we haven't yet put the navbar to use. We'll do it very soon, just after we add this p tag that'll say dev event. This will appear next to the logo, so people know the name as well. And below the link, I'll display a UL, an unordered list, that'll contain additional links. The first link will point to homepage for now, and it'll say home. We can duplicate it 2 more times. The second one will point to the events page, and the third one to the create event form. Now, if you save this, we can actually use this navbar in our layout, not in our page, because the layout will make it appear across all of our pages, which is another great lesson to be taught here. Whenever you're seeing something that appears across multiple pages, such as this navbar appearing here on the homepage, on the details page, and on the admin dashboard, then it's a good idea to put it in the layout. But if something is appearing just on the authentication page, for example, then you can put it on that page directly. These are also some principles taught in the Ultimate Next.js course before I showed you the curriculum, but now I can actually show you the full app that we're building as part of that course, and it's Dev Overflow, the more advanced clone of the full stack Overflow application with complex sorting, filtering, search, and yeah, here you can see that we have the global search right here, which searches across all different types of data in our database, such as questions, users, answers, and so much more. So for example, on our profile page, we can still have this global search, and it's also shared across all the other pages, such as collections, community, homepage. It's everywhere. But for example, it's not on the login and sign up pages. That's because these two use a completely different layout. So with that in mind, let's put this navbar to use right here above our div containing the light rays. I'll simply refer to it as navbar and import it from the proper place. It should look something like this. On smaller screens, we can see just the logo and the links, but when you enlarge it, you can see a more beautiful version of our dev event application. Now let's turn these boring events, which are just pieces of text, into actual reusable events cards. We can do that by creating a new reusable component in our components folder, which you can call event card.tsx. Run rafce to quickly spin it up, and then this component will accept all of the data that it needs to show as props because each event card will show us completely different data. Let me show you what I mean. We can first make it accept, let's do a title and an image. These will be of a type props. We're using these props so TypeScript knows what this component is accepting. So right at the top, we can say interface of props and make it accept a title of a type string, as well as an image of a type string, as we'll pass over a URL. Then we can immediately return a link because each one of these cards will be clickable, pointing to the full events details page by having an href pointing to, for example, for now, we can leave it as just /events. We'll change it later. And an ID of event card. Within it, we can display an image with a source equal to image. And right below it, a p tag where we're rendering title with the class name of title. Don't forget to import the image coming from next image. And we also have to give it the alt prop, which is going to be rendering the title, the width of about 410, the height of about 300, so it looks like a banner format, and a class name of poster. Now that we have created this reusable event card, we can head back over to our page where we're mapping over these 4 events. And instead of just mapping over the numbers right now, we can actually create a new events array, which will have 2 objects for now. It can have a first one that has an image of /images /event1.png, and it'll have a title of event1. I'll duplicate it to create the event2 and event2.png respectively. Now we can map over these 2 events by saying events.map. And this time we won't just be rendering the event number, rather we'll be rendering a reusable event card like this. That still will be within its own li. So I'll create a list item with a key equal to event.title. And within it, we'll render the event card to which we will spread all of the event properties like this. Immediately, if you do that, you'll be able to see 2 new featured events, event 1 and event 2, showcasing their images. Now we have to focus on passing some other important event data as well to make each event even more distinctive. For this, we can refer to our design. Like, what other important pieces of info does each event have, so we can create those events in the database later on and then use this reusable event card component to render completely different pieces of data. Of course, we have the location, this one right here. Then there's the image and the title, as well as the date and the time. And finally, we need some kind of an ID or a slug, allowing us to redirect to that event's details page. So let's go ahead and define those pieces of data right here. Alongside the image and the title, we'll also have a slug that's going to be something like event1. We'll have a location equal to location1, as well as a date set to date1, and finally a time set to time1. Pretty unimaginative, right? But I think this is really the part where it makes sense to include an AI coding agent that can help us when we need help. I typically use Junie for much more complex tasks because it can really do a lot, but in this case, we'll use it to generate some meaningful data for our events. I'll leave the link down in the description so you can download it and use it alongside WebStorm. It is super convenient. I press Command-Shift-P and just search for Junie. It immediately pops up right here. You get examples of what you could ask it to do, but in this case, we can just ask it to create a new file, which is going to be in libconstants, in the root folder. It should export an array named events containing real upcoming conferences. I'll leave this snippet so you can copy it in the video kit down below, and you can just paste it here. Now, just before I let Junie generate things, see here that I said that we need to make sure that the data looks realistic and can be directly imported and used in the event card component. Since I said this, it's very important to dive into the event card and make sure to update the props so it knows exactly which fields we're expecting to use. This will include the slug that we created, also the location. It'll include the date, and finally, the time. TypeScript is super useful, not just for us, but also for AI agents to know the structure of the application and to just align the expectations. Now that this is done, we can go ahead and let Junie do its job. This typically takes about half a minute, so I'll let it do its work and I'll be right back. And even sooner, it created a new constants file, so we can head over into it. Directly within lib constants, there we go, curated list of upcoming popular dev events. It created and exported an event item so that we can now easily import it. So we can easily use it across whenever it needs to be used. And then there's some other events right here. So let's go ahead and easily use them by heading over into our page. Instead of creating our own array of events, we can now very easily just import these events coming from lib constants. So we're not cluttering our view right here. And just like that, you immediately get all of these other events listed right here. So now we can head over into this component to display all of these additional pieces of data that we now have. Let's first get all of these props, such as the slug, the location, the date, and the time. We will use the slug right here in the URL, so we can point to it. In between the image and the title, I will also display a div that'll display the location. So this div will have a class name equal to flex, flex-row, gap of 2, and we'll render an image that has a source of /icons/pin.svg with an alt tag of location, a width, very small, of about 14. Height can be set to 14 as well. And then just below it, I'll display a p tag that'll render the location. There we go. Some are happening in San Francisco. This one says Vienna, but I believe it was actually in Croatia. There's also Los Angeles, Paris, and Vancouver. Alongside showing the location, let's also display some additional date and time information below the p tag. So I'll create a div with a class name of date time. And within it, I'll display a div that'll be very similar to this div. It'll contain an image for the icon and then a p tag for the actual info. But instead of it being a pin, it'll be a calendar with the alt tag of date. And then this will render the date. The date is here. Now I can duplicate this div just below. And this time we'll change it over to clock for the time. And then we can render the time. Perfect. This now feels like a real event card. So now if I expand our screen, take a look at this. The navbar looks great on desktop. So does the hero section. We can explore the events. And then there's a list of all of the most popular dev events around the globe. Looking good already. Now, this is the point in time where we actually have something tangible and visible on our app. So what do you say that we follow the best practices of writing code in general and actually ship this code over to GitHub? It looks like GitHub is preparing for their own conference, but I've closed that because we have our own app that tells us about dev events. So now let's go ahead and create a new repo. I'll do it on my personal profile and I'll call it dev events Next.js 16 crash course. Let's go ahead and create the repo. Once you do that, you'll be given the steps needed to connect it to your local repo right now. So let's just follow them by opening up the terminal and running git init, git add dot, git commit dash m, first commit, git branch dash m main to open up a new branch, and then git remote add origin with the URL of your repo, and finally git push u origin main. This will take all the existing code and push it over to GitHub. While we're here, we can also provide some additional info by copying it from our layout, the hub for every dev event you must not miss. That's the description. For the website, we'll be able to put it later on once we actually deploy it. But for now, I'll say jsmastery.com. For the topics, we can say Next.js and Next.js 16, and we can hide these to make our repo a bit cleaner, but I'll make sure to add HTTPS right here to the URL and save it. Perfect. Now, as we continue developing this application, and I would highly advise you to do this for all the upcoming applications, always push over to GitHub. It's super beneficial for so many reasons. Anybody can head over to your GitHub profile and check out your contribution graph. The more you push, the more active you are. Your projects can also get noticed, and most importantly, potential employers are gonna look at your commit history. Not your browser history, don't be afraid, just your commit history, where we need to make sure to use proper commit names. So for every single feature moving forward, we will not only write proper commit names, but we'll also be opening up different branches and pull requests so we can verify that the code that we actually write is of high quality. CodeRabbit here will be of great help, as it'll help us cut that code review time and bugs, well, in half, right? So starting from next feature onward, you, me, and the rabbit will be reviewing all of our code. So click the link down in the description to start with a free trial of CodeRabbit. It's also available in many IDEs, and one of their newer features are CLI reviews, which means that you can get instant code reviews directly from your terminal while you're developing the app. We'll explore all that and more very soon. But for now, just so we don't forget, let's immediately create a new branch for the feature that we're going to start developing next. And that is implementing PostHog. So you can say git checkout to immediately move to this new branch, and -B to automatically create it, implement PostHog. There we go. If you've done that properly, you can just switch over to this new branch, implement PostHog, and I think that gives you a pretty good idea of the feature that we'll develop next. So let's do it. Now that our homepage is up and running, it's time to shift our focus from what we've built to how do people actually use it. Because here's the thing, even the most beautiful designed app isn't truly valuable until we understand how users interact with it. Are they visiting the pages we expect them to visit? Or are they just randomly clicking around? Where are they dropping off? Are there errors happening behind the scenes that we are unaware of? That's where PostHog comes in. It's an open source analytics and product insights platform that helps us answer all these questions and more. With PostHog, you can automatically track user behavior, see how different features are performing, monitor errors in real time, and even capture valuable metrics that guide future development. And I'm actually including this step in the project because this is how real-world production apps are built. It's not just about writing code. It's about creating something that evolves based on user feedback and data. But you might be wondering, why are we setting this up now, right after building the homepage and before diving into the rest of the features? The reason is simple. Analytics are most valuable when they're a part of the development process from the very beginning. By integrating PostHog early, we ensure that every new feature we add will be measurable and trackable from day one. This approach reflects how real-world SaaS products are built. Heck, the entirety of jsmastery.com is fully tracked by PostHog. Seeing what you guys do on the platform, where you click, how useful specific features are, matters so much to me. So that's why tracking these data pieces with PostHog allows us to continue shaping the platform based on user behavior, not just intuition. So in this lesson, you'll learn how to set up PostHog inside of our Dev Events application. And together, we'll explore its features. This will allow you to integrate PostHog into every single one of your upcoming Next.js applications to make them intelligent, data-driven platforms. Because the process is more or less the same. So let me show you. To get started, click the PostHog link down in the description. And just check out this super unique landing page. I'll have to just ignore how cool it is for now and just show you how we can get started. So click this link right here. You'll have to choose your region and then sign up through one of the providers. It'll ask you to create a new organization. So type JS Mastery. Then you can select your role. And if you have a second, You can also tell this hedgehog that you heard about it from me. So say Adrian or a JS Mastery is fine as well. And let's create the org. Now, it'll ask you which products you would like to use. You can select whatever you want. I want to use product analytics, web analytics, data warehouse will be useful, session replays. Later on in upcoming videos, we might even dive into feature flags and experiments. Surveys are great if you want to just get a quick NPS score or user satisfaction score. And then, of course, error tracking. That's what we're here for. So I'll actually go ahead and select everything. Starting with product analytics, let's go. I just realized that we're still looking at a light color theme. So at this point, you can just switch it over to dark mode. That's much better. Now, the next step is to install PostHawk to make it run with our application. Believe it or not, Next.js is at the top of the list of all of these frameworks, and that's exactly what we want to use it with. As I told you, this course will teach you how to use PostHawk with every single one of your upcoming Next.js applications. Now, you can copy this AI setup wizard command. This AI wizard should install and configure PostHawk automatically. So here you have to choose your PostHawk cloud region. It'll try to authenticate you. It'll install PostHawk.js, PostHawk node, review the documentation for Next.js, create all the necessary files, and basically set it up for you. If you're using an AI-powered IDE, you'll also be asked if you want to install the MCP server to use PostHawk in your editor. That will teach your AI how to use PostHawk. In this case, I'll skip it, but that's definitely something we can explore in the next video. And that's it. Successfully installed PostHawk. What this installation did is it created a new file called instrumentationclient.ts, and it also added PostHawk's environment variables to your .env file. Now, as soon as PostHawk captures the first event within your application, it'll let you know that on the setup page. So if you head over to localhost 3000 and try clicking around a bit, you'll see that it auto-captured an event a few seconds ago, and with that, the installation is complete. So let's continue. Here, it's asking us what we want to use PostHawk for to auto-capture front-end interactions, enable heat maps, enable web vitals, and enable session recordings. I'll say yes to all because these are all great features that we don't want to miss. Let's continue. And now I think this is the best part. There's both a completely free plan that allows you to have one project, and then there's also the pay-as-you-go plan, but with the free tier included, which starts at $0 per month. And I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say this, but PostHawk's free tier is the best in the game. I really mean it. It is highly likely that if you're using PostHawk on your personal projects, you'll never cross the free tier. If you start using it on your apps that grow and have so many users, then it's still super cheap. But then we're hoping that you're making money off of this app, right? So for now, I'll go ahead and proceed with the free plan. You can invite teammates if you want to, and we're in. Now, I've zoomed it out a bit so you can better see what's happening here on the screen. On the left side, there's a left sidebar allowing you to get to different parts of your dashboard. In the middle, you have this browser-like explorer where you can see all the different insights. And then on the right, there's the quick start guide where you can learn everything about PostHawk. I would actually advise you to go through it to learn a bit more about how it works. For now, I'll skip inviting a team member because we're working on this solo. And then we are ready to create our first insight. So click on that. What this allows you to do is to analyze user behavior patterns in your product. You can visualize events, actions, and properties to understand how people use your app. So let's start by quickly creating a new insight. Even though we don't yet have too much data captured, we can already set up a simple page view insight to see how many people visited our app up to this point. So right here at the top, you can say Home Page Views, then select the page view and the total count, and switch this option over to a cumulative line chart. Once you've done that, click Save, and that's your first insight. So now if you head over to the home page, you can see some insights created for us on your dashboard, but you can also head over to Dashboards and create a new dashboard that'll have access to this new insight that you created. So insights go onto dashboards. There we go. You're now tracking general app usage. That can be the name of the dashboard. And you can see that we have about 4 page views since we set up PostHawk. Now, another thing I want to do right from the start is to enable error tracking. So on the left side sidebar under behavior, you can click on error tracking and enable exception auto capture. Now, later on, when you visit error tracking, we'll be able to see all the errors that are happening. And just like that, you now have PostHog successfully integrated within our Dev Events project. This is the first step toward building truly data-driven applications. An app that doesn't just function, but actively learns, adapts, and improves based on how users interact with it. But this is only the beginning. As you develop more features and grow your platform, we'll revisit PostHog again and again, adding custom event tracking, building some new dashboards, and diving deeper into product analytics. So with every new feature, you'll make your app that much smarter, more intentional, and closer to the kind of the production-ready applications that companies rely on in real-world projects. Great work. In this lesson, you're going to learn how to integrate MongoDB within your Next.js applications. It's a highly flexible, document-based NoSQL database that pairs extremely well with modern frameworks like Next.js. MongoDB stores data in JSON-like documents, which makes it a natural fit for a JavaScript and TypeScript environment. You can structure your data exactly the way your frontend expects it, without complex migrations or rigid schemas. Its ability to scale horizontally, handle unstructured or evolving data, and perform lightning-fast queries makes it ideal for projects that need to grow quickly. That's why I've chosen MongoDB for this project. It's easy to get started with and easy to grow. So head over to MongoDB Atlas and click Get Started. Then create a new account or simply sign up with Google. Once you're in, head over to your organization and within it, create a new project. I'll call this one Dev Event Next.js Crash Course. And just click Next. Put yourself as the project owner that you are and create the project. After you have the project, we need to create a cluster, which is basically your database. For this, you'll have to choose the deployment of your cluster. Don't worry, you don't have to pay anything. Just select the free version, which is going to be more than enough. Select your region that is closest to you and click Create Deployment. Now you'll have to create your database user. Simply choose your username and password, which you can copy, and then create a database user. After you've created the user, choose a connection method. In this case, we're going to connect directly with our application using MongoDB's native driver, such as Node.js. We'll very soon install MongoDB within our application, but for now, let's wait until our cluster is provisioned. This can typically take a couple of minutes. When it's done, you'll be able to see a copyable connection string, so just copy it, and then back within your application, head over to your .env and name it MongoDB_URI, and make it equal to the connection string you just copied. Make sure to replace the password with the actual password you generated for your MongoDB user. With that, your serverless MongoDB database is ready to use. So in the next lesson, you'll start using this database to implement the core features of Dev Events. Before we dive into implementing database operations in our Next.js application, I want to stop and show you a tool I've been using a lot lately. It's Warp, an all-in-one AI-powered development environment built to help you build faster. Instead of memorizing commands and hopping between tools and documentation, just describe what you want in plain English, and Warp will understand, execute, and deliver these results instantly. And the best part is the developer experience you get from having everything together: a terminal, code editor, and agents all in one place. No need to have 3 different browsers, 1 editor, and 10 open tabs just to get some output from an AI. When it comes to pricing, Warp also has a 100% free plan, so you can check it out before making any commitment. For a limited time, specifically for you watching this video, you're getting Warp Pro plan for only $1, which is normally $18 per month. So click the link down in the description and grab it before it's gone. Let me show you how we can set it up. Click the link down in the description and download it for your operating system. Once you open it up, it'll look a bit empty, but that's for a reason. Soon you'll be able to open all the different things needed for you to develop apps right here. Here, you can select from different agents. Auto mode is pretty cool, and you can even tweak it how you like it. But there are more advanced models like GPT-5 or Claude 4 or 4.5 Sonnet, which are right now one of the best models when it comes to coding. And don't forget that Warp is actually a terminal, so you can just navigate over to our repo. So just cd into Next.js Crash Course and optimize Warp for this codebase. It'll actually let the agent understand the codebase and generate rules for it. So just click Optimize, and we'll say index. No need to generate the Warp MD file for now. Perfect. We're now on the implementing PostHog branch. And actually, this reminds me that we've finished the PostHog implementation in the previous lesson. So we might as well commit it. I'll say git add dot, git commit -m, implement PostHog, and run git push. Specifically, since we created a new branch, we want to set upstream to origin to push it to our actual remote repo. A pretty cool Warp feature here is that you can just press Command Enter and it'll automatically fix the command up for you, which is absolutely amazing. You can just say run. There we go, the branch is now pushed. So if you head over to GitHub, you'll see that there is a new pull request to be reviewed. Go ahead and create it. We want to merge it straight into main. And in the upcoming lessons, we'll use CodeRabbit's help here to review this PR, but this one is super simple. We basically didn't write any code besides following along the PostHog implementation guide. So for now, I'll just go ahead and auto merge this one. Now the latest code is all on main, which means that within our code, we can now check out to the main branch, pull the latest changes by running git pull, and we can create a new branch, which is going to be all about what we're going to do next. It'll be about implementing database models. So say git checkout -b to create this new branch and call it database models. And you can immediately see that Warp offers itself to fix a bug or implement a feature within our database models branch. Slow down there, cowboy. First, I want to teach you guys how to think like a system designer, to think about what we need, which data pieces do we need to model, and how our application database structure will look like. Only then can we bring in Warp to help us. So let's do that next. Before you touch a single line of code, pause and think like a systems designer. Data modeling isn't about typing out a schema. It's about understanding the problem domain and asking the right questions until the structure of your data almost designs itself. So start with the most fundamental question. What is the main entity in this application? For dev events, the answer is clear. It's an event. Everything else revolves around it. Now ask, what defines an event? Well, it needs a title, that's the name users will see. It needs a description and an overview, so people know what it's about. It probably needs an image to make it visually appealing. Where is it happening? That's the venue and location. When is it happening? That's the date and time. But those need to be stored in a normalized, consistent way so you can easily sort, filter, and query them reliably. Maybe also how is it happening? Like the mode, is it online, offline, or hybrid? Who is it for? Like that's the audience. And what's going to happen there? Maybe like the agenda or a list of topics or activities. Maybe even who's organizing it, right? If it's a well-known company like Microsoft or Google, that can be there as well. Also, if you're advanced, you might want to think about the organization of how you want to categorize it, so the people can search it more easily for later. That's where tags would come in. And for SEO-friendly URLs, you'll want a slug, which is a unique URL-safe identifier generated from the title. Every one of these fields answers a real-world question, and together, they describe exactly what an event is, not just for your code, but for your product. You're designing them based on real-world requirements. That's how data modeling should always start. But that's only half the story. The next question you should ask yourself is, how do users interact with these events? Well, you could say that they sign up for them or that they book them. So we need to introduce a second entity, booking. So for that, you also need to ask yourself the same questions. What do we need to store for a booking? We need to know which event was booked. That's a reference to the event ID. We need to know who booked it. An email address will be enough. And we also need to track when the booking was made. We can do that with automatic timestamps like created at or updated at. This simple relationship, one event to many bookings, forms the backbone of our platform's logic. And while this might feel small and focused right now, remember that this is just the foundation. In larger production scale systems, a booking could evolve into something much more, like a payment status, different ticket tiers, user profiles, cancellation policies, refunds, and more. This is your starting point. And from here, you're free to grow it in any direction you want. But the one thing I want you to get is the mindset of asking, what should the data do? Rather than just, what data do I need? This is the foundation of backend architecture. You think from the real world behavior